The flickering fluorescent lights of the makeshift press conference tent cast a sickly pallor on Chief Everett Green's face. Once a figure of unshakable authority in Shadow Creek, his tailored uniform now seemed to sag under the weight of his defeat. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, darted nervously between the flashing cameras and the stern faces of the federal agents flanking him. A guttural murmur rippled through the assembled journalists, each vying for a soundbite from the man whose empire had crumbled in a spectacular display of federal intervention. I deny these baseless accusations," he stammered, his voice hoarse, a stark contrast to the booming pronouncements of past years. "This is a witch hunt, a betrayal." He gestured vaguely at the chaos surrounding the precinct, the picket lines, the signs demanding justice, the federal marshals carrying boxes of evidence from what was once his inner sanctum. Flashbacks, quick and jarring, flickered through his mind. The defiant glint in Officer Jacob's eyes, the quiet, almost invisible man who had stood his ground, the relentless, methodical dismantling of everything he had built. He had been so certain of his invincibility, so entrenched in the local power structure, that the notion of an external force capable of tearing it all down seemed impossible. Now, staring into the abyss of his ruin, the only emotion left was a bewildered, impotent rage. He was a king without a kingdom, utterly exposed. A federal agent, impassive and professional, gently guided him away from the podium. The cameras continued to flash, immortalizing the moment of his public humiliation. The crowd surged, questions turning into accusations, accusations into condemnation. As he was led away, Chief Green glanced back at the precinct, a fortress that had become his prison. The city he had so confidently controlled now felt alien, consumed by shadows. 6 months earlier, the first rays of dawn were still tentative, painting the eastern sky with hues of soft orange and muted violet, when Marcus Thorne stepped onto the expansive deck of his newly acquired home in Echo Creek. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. At 42, Marcus moved with an understated grace, a testament to years of disciplined routine. His physique was lean, powerful, honed by early morning runs and a meticulous approach to well-being. He wasn't just physically fit. His mind, a sharp instrument honed by years as a special agent for the FBI, was in constant, quiet motion, observing, analyzing, connecting. Echo Creek, with its manicured lawns, mature oak trees, and the promise of serene suburban life, was supposed to be a respite. After a particularly grueling undercover operation that had dismantled a human trafficking ring, Marcus had sought a place where the lines were clearer, where the shadows of urban corruption felt distant. His new home, a stately craftsman with a sprawling backyard that sloped gently down to a small, babbling creek, seemed to embody that promise. He'd spent the last few weeks meticulously setting up his home office, a fortress of digital security and efficient organization, and tending to the garden, finding a surprising solace in the rhythm of pruning and planting. This morning, however, a subtle undercurrent disturbed his tranquility. As he sipped his coffee, a bitter brew he preferred, he noticed Mrs. Henderson, his neighbor from across the street, peering from behind her lace curtains. It wasn't an overtly hostile gaze, more a persistent, cautious curiosity. Since his arrival, he'd observed it in various forms. The slow-moving cars that lingered a moment too long, the polite but probing questions from the postal worker, the way conversations on the street would sometimes drop to a hushed whisper as he passed. He was the new face, the black face, in a predominantly white, historically insular community. He didn't resent it. He merely registered it, filed it away as another data point. His professional life had taught him that prejudice, like any other systemic flaw, often manifested not as overt aggression, but as subtle, insidious microaggressions, a constant, low-level hum of otherness. Today's project was the wooden fence bordering his property line with the vacant lot next door, a section that had been damaged in a recent storm. He'd ordered specialized tools, preferring to handle the repairs himself rather than dealing with local contractors who, he'd noticed, sometimes seemed to inflate prices or delay service when dealing with him. It was a minor inconvenience, but another data point nonetheless. He descended to the backyard, the scent of fresh-cut lumber already invigorating him. He laid out his tools with practiced precision, his movements economical. The rhythmic thud of his hammer against the splintered wood was the only sound breaking the morning quiet, a temporary peace before the inevitable. He paused, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, and glanced up. The sun was now fully awake, and with it, the day's subtle tensions. He knew, with an almost prescient certainty born of experience, that some days, even in the quietest of suburbs, the world had a way of bringing its own brand of chaos right to your doorstep. He was ready for it. The rhythmic thud of Marcus's hammer had just found its cadence when the distant wail of a siren pierced the suburban calm. He didn't stop immediately, assuming the emergency was elsewhere, a minor traffic incident or a false alarm. But the siren grew steadily louder, closer, resolving into the distinct, insistent sound of a police cruiser. He straightened up, hammer still in hand, as two patrol vehicles, their lights flashing but sirens now silent, pulled up sharply at the curb in front of his house. The white and blue paint of the Echo Creek Police Department stood out starkly against the meticulously kept green of his lawn. Two officers emerged from the lead car. The first, a younger, nervous-looking patrolman, kept his eyes mostly on the ground. The second, however, was a different breed. Officer Jacob Price, judging by the name patch on his chest, was a burly man with a thick neck and a self-satisfied swagger that seemed to radiate from him like heat. He wore his uniform like a second skin, a symbol of unquestioned authority. His eyes, small and cold, immediately locked onto Marcus. "Morning," Price called out, his voice carrying an edge of condescension that grated against the otherwise peaceful morning. He didn't wait for Marcus to respond. "We got a call about a suspicious individual trespassing on this property. You live here?" Marcus slowly lowered his hammer, placing it carefully on a stack of lumber. He walked towards the edge of his property, maintaining a calm, even pace. "Good morning, officer," he replied, his voice level, devoid of any discernible emotion. "Yes, I live here. My name is Marcus Thorne. I own this property." Price scoffed, a short, dismissive sound. "Own it, huh? Funny, anonymous tip said otherwise." Said a black man was tearing up the fence, looking like he didn't belong. His gaze lingered pointedly on Marcus's hands, then his work clothes, then back to his face, a silent, lingering assessment that felt less like an inquiry and more like an accusation. "Got any ID on you, Mr. Thorne?" The name was delivered with an almost imperceptible sneer, stripping it of any respect. "Certainly," Marcus said, his movements deliberate. He reached into his back pocket, slowly retrieved his wallet, and extracted his driver's license. He handed it to Officer Price, who took it with an exaggerated slowness, his fingers brushing Marcus's with a subtle, demeaning drag. Price barely glanced at the license before tucking it into his vest pocket. "So, you're saying this is your house?" Price asked again, louder this time, as if Marcus hadn't already provided the information. "Got proof of ownership? Deed? Utility bill? Anything to back up your story?" "Officer, my driver's license clearly states this address," Marcus stated, his voice still calm, but a steeliness was beginning to temper his tone. "I can also provide you with the deed to the property, which is inside. And if you'd like, I can show you the keys." He gestured towards the house, offering the simplest, most direct proof. Price ignored the offer. He exchanged a knowing look with the younger officer, who merely shifted uncomfortably. "Keys, huh? Anyone can have keys. People break into houses all the time, get keys. What's a black man like you doing in a neighborhood like this, anyway? Houses here aren't cheap." His tone was laced with an insidious blend of feigned concern and thinly veiled racism. The microaggression was blatant, the implication clear. Marcus felt the familiar, cold flicker of controlled fury, but he allowed none of it to show on his face. He'd faced worse, much worse, in the field. This was merely an appetizer. He was observing Price, every facial twitch, every dismissive gesture, every inflection of his voice. He noted the slight bulge under Price's uniform jacket, a body camera, almost certainly active. "Good. Officer, I understand you're doing your job," Marcus began, his voice still perfectly even. "But I assure you, there's no misunderstanding. I am lawfully present on my own property. I would appreciate it if you returned my license and allowed me to continue my work." Price chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Your work? Looking suspicious on someone else's property. That's a new one. Tell you what, Mr. Thorne, I'm gonna run your name. And if anything comes back funny, or if you can't prove this is your house, you're coming down to the station with us for trespassing. Understand? He puffed out his chest, asserting his perceived dominance. Until then, I suggest you step away from that fence. You're making people nervous. The veiled threat, the casual dismissal of his rights, the public humiliation, it was all textbook. Marcus nodded almost imperceptibly. Understood, Officer Price. His eyes, however, held a depth that Price completely missed. The casual disrespect was noted. The abuse of power was registered. The fatal underestimation of his person was the biggest mistake Price would ever make. Inside, the quiet hum of Marcus's strategic mind had just switched to a high-alert, operational tempo. The game had begun. Officer Price, apparently satisfied with his display of authority, turned his back on Marcus, pulling out his radio and speaking into it in hushed, officious tones. The younger officer, still visibly uncomfortable, kept his gaze fixed on the perfectly trimmed hedges, avoiding Marcus's eyes. It was a clear power play, a calculated attempt to assert dominance and leave Marcus feeling exposed and vulnerable. Marcus watched them for a moment, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. He waited until Price had finished his radio call, until the officers turned their backs to return to their patrol car, clearly expecting him to remain still, humiliated. Only then did Marcus turn and walk slowly back towards his house. There was no haste, no outward sign of anger or frustration. His steps were measured, deliberate. He entered his home, the cool air inside a stark contrast to the simmering tension outside. He didn't slam the door, didn't even close it with undue force. Instead, he walked directly to his meticulously organized home office, a space that was both sanctuary and command center. The room was sparse, functional, dominated by a large, multi-monitor workstation. He settled into his ergonomic chair, the leather creaking softly. His hands, still bearing the faint scent of wood and earth from his earlier work, moved with practiced precision across the keyboard. He bypassed his usual work systems, instead booting up a dedicated, highly secure laptop, a government-issued device, encrypted and isolated from the general network. This wasn't about his current FBI casework. This was about something far more fundamental. He accessed a secure portal, a gateway to a very specific branch of the federal government. His fingers flew across the keyboard, entering a complex series of authentications, two-factor and biometric. Once inside, he navigated to a specific internal reporting form. The title was stark: Civil Rights Violation, Allegation of Systemic Abuse. In the narrative field, Marcus began to type, his prose precise, factual, and devoid of personal emotion. He detailed the entire interaction with Officer Price, the anonymous tip, the questioning of his ownership, the thinly veiled racial remarks, the implied threat of arrest for trespassing on his own property. He cited the specific date, time, and location. He included a brief description of Officer Price and the other officer, their vehicle numbers if he'd caught them, and critically, he noted the presence of Price's body camera. He wasn't merely reporting an incident. He was activating a process. He knew the protocol. This initial report would trigger an internal review, and given his own standing as a special agent, it would receive immediate, high-level attention. It wouldn't be a simple complaint. It would be the first stone dropped into a very deep, very still pond. After meticulously detailing the incident, he paused. Then, with a subtle shift in his approach, he added another layer. He opened a separate, secure communication channel, one reserved for direct contact with his supervisor in the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility, a unit tasked with investigating misconduct by law enforcement personnel, both federal and local, when civil rights are implicated. He composed a brief, coded message, initiating CRV investigation, local jurisdiction, personal incident as catalyst. Recommend discreet, comprehensive review of Echo Creek PD's historical conduct concerning 18 U.S. Code Section 242. The 18 U.S. Code Section 242 he referenced was a federal statute that criminalizes the deprivation of rights under color of law, precisely what he had just experienced. It was the legal linchpin for federal intervention in local police misconduct. He hit send on both messages. No anger, No outward display of triumph. Just a quiet, steel-cold resolve. He had not sought personal vengeance. He had sought justice, systemic justice, by leveraging the very mechanism designed for it. Officer Price, with his puffed-up chest and condescending sneer, had unwittingly become the fuse. The hidden mechanism was now active. The clock had begun ticking for the Echo Creek Police Department, though they remained blissfully unaware. The weeks that followed the incident unfolded with an unnerving, almost deceptive calm. Officer Price and his partner continued their patrols, their occasional glares at Marcus's house serving as fleeting reminders of their perceived victory. Marcus, for his part, maintained his routine, working in his yard, jogging through the neighborhood, exchanging polite but brief nods with neighbors. To the casual observer, nothing had changed. The surface of Echo Creek remained placid, but beneath that surface, ripples were beginning to spread. Marcus, with his finely tuned senses, noticed the subtle shifts first. An unfamiliar, dark-colored sedan, a model common to government fleets, parked discreetly down the street for a few hours. Its occupants, ostensibly reading or making phone calls, possessed the same practiced anonymity he recognized from his own field operations. Then there were the newcomers in the local coffee shop, a casually dressed couple, too observant, too focused on the subtle interactions around them. They carried themselves with an air of quiet authority, not unlike his own colleagues. He also picked up on an increased, though still veiled, curiosity among his neighbors. Mrs. Henderson's glances became more frequent, but now they seemed to carry a hint of apprehension rather than mere nosiness. The postal worker, usually talkative, grew strangely reserved. Marcus knew his inquiry had been activated. The higher power had arrived, invisible yet undeniably present, weaving itself into the fabric of Echo Creek. Meanwhile, at the Echo Creek Police Department, Chief Everett Green remained utterly oblivious. He saw no threat, only the usual bureaucratic malaise. He was a man of firm convictions, chief among them his unshakable belief in his own judgment and the unquestioning loyalty of his department. He viewed Echo Creek as his personal fiefdom, protected by a network of local political connections, the mayor, a few city council members, and a sympathetic district attorney. Federal agencies, in his mind, were distant, sluggish beasts, prone to overreach but ultimately easily deterred by local resistance and political maneuvering. Just some federal busybodies, he'd grumbled to Officer Price over lukewarm coffee one morning, dismissing a vague internal memo about an upcoming community outreach initiative from the Department of Justice. Probably looking to justify their budget. Ignore them. They'll poke around, find nothing, and crawl back to whatever ivory tower they came from. Price, emboldened by the chief's confidence, nodded vigorously. Exactly, Chief. These city folks got nothing on us. We run a tight ship here. He still relished the memory of putting the uppity black agent in his place, a story he'd embellished for his colleagues, basking in their quiet admiration. He saw no connection between that incident and any potential federal interest. However, the Community Outreach Initiative began to manifest in more concrete forms. Agent Sarah Davis, a sharp, no-nonsense investigator from the Civil Rights Division of the FBI, arrived in Echo Creek. She didn't announce herself with sirens and flashing lights. Instead, she and her small, highly specialized team began by quietly establishing a temporary field office in a nondescript commercial building on the outskirts of town. Their initial movements were deliberately low-key, focusing on public records, demographic data, and open-source intelligence. They attended local town hall meetings, observed police patrols from a distance, and spoke with community leaders under the guise of general information gathering. Agent Davis was methodical, precise. She didn't just look at the incident involving Marcus Thorne. That was merely the entry point. Her directive, initiated by Marcus's meticulously worded report, was to look at the broader picture. She was looking for patterns, for systemic issues, for the very culture that allowed officers like Price to operate with such impunity. The chief and his officers, blinded by their ingrained sense of local immunity, saw only shadows where a storm was gathering. They were confident they were untouchable, failing to recognize that the quiet arrival of federal agents wasn't just bureaucracy. It was the first, almost imperceptible tremor of an earthquake. Weeks bled into months, and the initially subtle tremors of federal scrutiny began to grow into more distinct rumblings. Agent Davis and her team, operating with the quiet efficiency of seasoned professionals, transitioned from passive observation to active inquiry. Their temporary office, once just a sterile room, now hummed with the quiet industry of data analysis, phone calls, and meticulous cross-referencing. Their first major breakthrough came from the painstaking review of local police reports. What started as an examination of the suspicious individual call involving Marcus Thorne quickly expanded. Davis discovered a disturbing trend: a disproportionate number of arrests for petty offenses, loitering, disturbing the peace, minor traffic violations, targeting black residents, often with boilerplate descriptions and questionable justification. Many of these reports, while seemingly minor individually, painted a collective picture of racial profiling. "Look at this," Agent Davis murmured to her lead analyst, pointing to a cluster of incidents over a 3-year period. Officer Price's name appears on over 60% of these suspicious activity reports involving minority residents. And in nearly half of those, the charges were either dropped or significantly reduced in court. The analyst, a young woman named Maya Rodriguez, nodded grimly. It suggests the arrests weren't about actual crime, but harassment. They were either fishing expeditions or designed to create a paper trail for certain individuals. Next, they turned to the internal affairs records of the Echo Creek Police Department. Here, the picture grew even darker. Numerous civilian complaints, particularly from the minority community, alleging excessive force, verbal abuse, or unwarranted stops, had been filed. Every single one, however, had been dismissed. Insufficient evidence, unsubstantiated, officer acted within policy. The same stock phrases appeared repeatedly, signed off by Chief Green himself or a hand-picked internal review board. It was a systematic whitewash. Back at the Echo Creek PD, the dismissive attitude of Chief Green and Officer Price began to crack, ever so slightly. They noticed the influx of Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, requests, not from local media, but from obscure federal email addresses. They received official requests for body camera footage, incident reports, and personnel files, all routed through the mayor's office, but clearly originating from a federal entity. "It's just standard procedure, Chief," Mayor Thompson had assured Green over a tense lunch. "They're probably doing some sort of departmental review or grant audit. Just give them what they ask for. Don't give him any reason to stick around." Chief Green, while outwardly maintaining his bravado, felt a prickle of unease. "Grant audit?" he grumbled to Price later. "They're asking for our use of force policies from 5 years ago for a grant audit." He pounded a fist on his desk. "They're trying to find something. Some liberal agenda crap." Officer Price, however, remained largely unconcerned, still puffed up by the memory of his encounter with Marcus. "Let him dig, Chief. We got nothing to hide. Everything's by the book here. It's not like that uppity federal agent's gonna expose anything. He's just some civilian, probably mad we busted him for trespassing." The irony of Price referring to an FBI agent as a civilian was lost on him, a testament to his ingrained arrogance and profound underestimation of Marcus. But Davis wasn't just digging into paper trails. Her team discreetly began conducting interviews, framing them as part of a general community needs assessment. They spoke with community leaders, local activists, and most importantly, with individuals who had previously filed complaints against the police, people whose voices had been silenced or ignored by the local system. Slowly, carefully, a narrative emerged, stories of routine intimidation, selective enforcement, and an underlying current of racial bias that had festered unchallenged for years. The most damning pieces of the puzzle began to surface when Davis's team acquired, through a subpoena to a third-party server, archived body camera footage from the Echo Creek PD. While the department routinely purged older footage, a technical glitch had preserved some data on an auxiliary backup. It was a goldmine. Hours of footage, including Officer Price's own camera from the day of the incident with Marcus Thorne, began to reveal the stark, unvarnished truth. The casual racism, the aggressive posturing, the blatant disregard for due process. It was all there, undeniable and irrefutable. Chief Green and Officer Price might have still believed they were safe within their local bubble, but Agent Davis knew better. She was no longer simply investigating an incident. She was unraveling a pattern, exposing a culture, and the threads she was pulling were leading straight to the core of the Echo Creek Police Department. The invisible war had officially escalated. Here is Chapter 6. Chapter 6. Cracks in the Foundation, Unveiling the System. The polite requests from federal agencies quickly escalated into official subpoenas, backed by the full weight of the U.S. Attorney's Office. No longer operating under the guise of community outreach, Agent Davis's team openly established themselves in Echo Creek, drawing the nervous attention of local media and residents. The smiles on the faces of Chief Green and Mayor Thompson had long since vanished, replaced by a grim-faced defiance that barely concealed their growing panic. Davis's investigation began to reveal a deeply entrenched system of complicity that extended far beyond individual bad actors. She unearthed evidence of long-standing arrangements between the police department, the local prosecutor's office, and even elements within the city council. The modus operandi was clear. When a complaint against an officer, particularly Officer Price, gained traction, it was systematically routed through a chain of command designed to bury it. Prosecutors would decline to press charges, internal affairs reports would be written with a predetermined outcome, and any dissenting voices within the department were quietly sidelined or forced out. It's not just a few bad apples, Marcus, Agent Davis explained to Thorne during a secure video conference. Though they had met in person briefly, their primary communication remained digital and encrypted, maintaining the integrity of the ongoing investigation. It's the entire barrel. They've built an echo chamber where no one questions, no one challenges. Price wasn't just tolerated, he was protected. Marcus, stoic as ever, simply nodded. As expected, the system defends itself. That's why we hit it from the outside. The external pressure began to create internal fractures within the Echo Creek PD. Younger, less entrenched officers, witnessing the relentless, systematic dismantling of their department, started to become uneasy. Rumors of federal indictments, of careers ruined, circulated like wildfire. Some began to discreetly approach Davis's team, offering off-the-record tips or confirming existing suspicions. These junior officers, many of whom had joined with genuine intentions of serving the community, found themselves caught between loyalty to their colleagues and the stark reality of federal law. One such officer, a probationary patrolman named Miller, approached Davis's analyst, Maya, under the pretense of asking about a traffic citation. He eventually confessed, in a hushed voice, that he had witnessed Price planting evidence during a stop, a small bag of marijuana, on a black teenager who had dared to question Price's authority. Miller had been too afraid to report it internally, knowing it would be career suicide. His testimony, combined with other similar whispers, provided crucial corroboration for the mounting stack of digital evidence. Chief Green, in a desperate attempt to regain control, called an emergency department meeting. His address was a mix of bluster and thinly veiled threats. "These feds are trying to tear us apart from the inside," he barked, his face red with fury. "They want to make an example of Echo Creek. But we stand together. We're a family here. Anyone thinking of talking to them, remember where your paycheck comes from and who's got your back." Officer Price, seated front and center, nodded smugly, believing the chief's words would staunch the bleeding. But his bluster only alienated those who were already wavering. They saw not a leader, but a man clinging to power, willing to sacrifice his subordinates to save himself. The federal investigation was now visibly dissecting the city's power structure. The mayor's office was served with subpoenas for financial records, campaign contributions, and communications with the police department. Suddenly, the mayor, once a staunch ally of Chief Green, began to distance himself, issuing press releases about full cooperation and transparency, while privately scrambling to cover his own tracks. Chief Green, once so confident in his local impregnability, felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. The federal agents weren't just looking for isolated incidents of misconduct. They were tracing the lines of influence, exposing the network of favors and protection that had allowed him and his department to operate outside the bounds of justice for so long. He still didn't fully grasp the depth of the federal reach, nor did he suspect that the quiet black man he had humiliated months ago was the architect of his impending downfall. But the walls of his carefully constructed kingdom were beginning to crack, and the light of federal scrutiny was pouring through the fissures. The pretense of a discreet inquiry vanished entirely. Federal vehicles, unmarked but unmistakably official, became a common sight in Echo Creek. The temporary office expanded, bustling with activity, and federal agents began conducting official interviews at the police station itself, much to Chief Green's impotent fury. The local news, unable to ignore the persistent federal presence, ran daily stories, their headlines shifting from "federal inquiry underway" to "allegations of widespread corruption rock Echo Creek PD." Chief Green and Officer Price, now facing direct interrogations and constant scrutiny, escalated their obstruction tactics. They attempted to intimidate witnesses, particularly the younger officers who had shown signs of wavering. Officer Price openly mocked federal agents within earshot of his colleagues, trying to foster an us versus them mentality. They subtly lost documents, delayed the production of evidence, and coached officers on how to answer questions. Their arrogance, however, was now tinged with desperation. The confidence that had once radiated from Chief Green had curdled into a palpable paranoia. "They're trying to frame us, Price." Green spat, pacing his office like a caged animal, digging up ancient history, twisting every little thing. "That little punk Miller, I bet he's talking. I'll make sure he never works in law enforcement again." Price, however, was more concerned with his own rapidly disintegrating reputation. He'd been confronted with his own meticulously documented history of complaints, dismissed internally. "They're just trying to get us to crack, Chief," he insisted, though his bravado was starting to sound hollow. "We stick to our story, keep a united front." But the federal team was always one step ahead. Agent Davis, with her vast experience in these types of investigations, anticipated their every move. She had already secured the cooperation of several key witnesses through plea deals, offering immunity for testimony against the higher-ups. And then came the definitive blow, the fully recovered and authenticated body camera footage. The footage from Officer Price's camera on the day of the incident with Marcus Thorne was chillingly clear. It showed Price's aggressive posture, the dismissive wave of his hand, the sneering questions about Marcus's presence and race. It captured the exact words, the tone of voice, the casual dehumanization. More than that, the deep dive into the archived footage revealed a pattern of similar, even more egregious, behavior by Price and others. Unprovoked assaults, racial slurs, illegal searches, all systematically ignored or covered up by the internal affairs process. At the height of this pressure, Marcus received a secure call from Agent Davis. "We have it, Agent Thorne," she said, her voice grave. "All of it. The body cam footage, the internal cover-ups, the systemic profiling. It's undeniable." "Excellent," Marcus replied, his voice calm, but with a subtle satisfaction. "And the incident that started it all? Price's body cam from your property is damning," Davis confirmed. "It's a perfect microcosm of everything wrong with that department. It shows your composure, his aggression, the clear racial undertones. It will be central to our case." "My identity is still secure?" Marcus inquired. "For now," Davis assured him. "They still view you as the uppity civilian. That will change soon enough. Your official capacity as the complainant will be revealed when we present the evidence." Their conversation was brief, professional, a shared understanding of the gravity of their work. This wasn't about personal revenge for Marcus. It was about ensuring that the hidden mechanism of federal justice fulfilled its purpose. Chief Green, in his growing desperation, tried one last-ditch effort. He attempted to use his remaining political influence, calling in favors from old acquaintances in the state legislature, demanding they put pressure on the federal agencies. But the scale of the federal investigation, now explicitly focused on civil rights violations, placed it beyond local or even state political interference. The Department of Justice was a leviathan, slow to awaken but unstoppable once roused. As the federal grand jury convened in a nearby city, shrouded in secrecy, the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Subpoenas were issued for Chief Green and Officer Price to testify. They still believed they could talk their way out of it, or that the local system would ultimately protect them. They were still fatally underestimating the quiet man in the background, the man they had dismissed as a trespasser. The final act was upon them, and with it, the undeniable reckoning. The air in the federal courthouse was thick with tension, heavy with the weight of expectation and impending judgment. It was not a local municipal courtroom, easily manipulated by local politics, but a grand federal chamber, austere and impartial. Chief Everett Green and Officer Jacob Price sat at the defense table, their faces a mixture of strained defiance and profound apprehension. They were no longer swaggering figures of authority. They were men under siege, stripped of their power and facing an unfamiliar, unforgiving system. Beside them sat their state-appointed lawyers, who looked increasingly resigned. The prosecutor, a steely-eyed assistant U.S. attorney, methodically presented the mountain of evidence painstakingly compiled by Agent Davis's team. Charts detailing disproportionate arrests flickered on large screens, alongside meticulously documented internal affairs whitewashes. Witness after witness took the stand, former residents who had been harassed, community leaders who had tried to speak out, even a few former Echo Creek officers who had found the courage to expose the systemic corruption in exchange for immunity. Each testimony chipped away at the defense's crumbling facade. Then came the moment that shattered Chief Green's remaining composure. Agent Sarah Davis was called to the stand. After establishing her credentials and the scope of her investigation, the prosecutor led her to the central piece of evidence. Agent Davis, can you please describe the incident that initially triggered this extensive federal inquiry? Davis's voice was clear, calm, and utterly devastating. She described the call to the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility, the detailed report of a civil rights violation, and the subsequent initiation of a full-scale investigation into the Echo Creek Police Department's practices. Then, with a subtle nod from the prosecutor, she delivered the final blow. The complainant, the individual who reported the initial incident of racial profiling and potential abuse of power by Officer Jacob Price, was Special Agent Marcus Thorne of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled furiously. Chief Green's jaw dropped, his face draining of all color. Officer Price's eyes, wide with disbelief and horror, snapped towards the gallery where Marcus sat, impeccably dressed and utterly unmoving. The sneer he had worn for months vanished, replaced by a dawning, sickening realization. The uppity black civilian, the trespasser he had so casually humiliated, was an FBI agent. Not just any agent, but one with the authority and resolve to bring down an entire corrupt police department. The fatal underestimation had come home to roost. Marcus, unflinching, met Price's stunned gaze. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a quiet, resolute intensity. He was called to the stand next, a calm and formidable presence. He recounted the incident on his property with precise, detached detail, his voice a steady counterpoint to the fury building in Chief Green and Price. As he spoke, the full, unedited body camera footage from Officer Price's vest was played for the court. The video was damning. It showed Price's aggressive posturing, his condescending questions, his blatant racial insinuations, and his outright dismissal of Marcus's claims of ownership. The casual abuse of authority, the confidence that he was untouchable, it was all laid bare. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Price's past arrogance was projected larger than life, an undeniable record of his misconduct. Green could only watch in horrified fascination as the evidence against his hand-picked enforcer, and by extension, against his own leadership, mounted. His kingdom, built on arrogance and corruption, was not merely cracking, it was collapsing. When the footage ended, the silence was deafening. Marcus concluded his testimony with a simple, powerful statement. I initiated this investigation not for personal retribution, but because the systemic nature of the violations I experienced, and those I knew others in this community had suffered, demanded federal intervention. The law applies to everyone equally. The realization dawned on Chief Green and Officer Price with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a local squabble. This was a federal prosecution for civil rights abuses, with an FBI agent as the primary complainant and a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Their arrogance had been their undoing. The casual incident months ago, which they had dismissed as a minor annoyance, had now become the fulcrum of their absolute, undeniable downfall. The federal jury's verdict was swift and unequivocal. Guilty on multiple counts of civil rights violations under color of law for Officer Jacob Price. Chief Everett Green, facing charges of conspiracy to obstruct justice and aiding and abetting civil rights abuses, was also found guilty. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the Echo Creek Police Department and its entrenched power structure. In the sentencing hearing that followed, the federal judge delivered a scathing rebuke of the systemic corruption unearthed in Echo Creek. Officer Price received a substantial prison sentence, a stark reminder that badges did not confer immunity from the law. Chief Green, his once imposing figure now shrunken and defeated, was sentenced to an even longer term, his hubris and active role in orchestrating the cover-ups carrying a heavier penalty. Several other officers, implicated by the investigation and their own compromised testimonies, were either dismissed from the force or faced lesser criminal charges. The mayor, though not criminally charged, resigned in disgrace amidst revelations of his passive complicity and attempts to hinder the federal inquiry. In the wake of the convictions, Echo Creek was plunged into a period of profound introspection and mandated reform. Under the strict oversight of the Department of Justice, the police department was completely overhauled. A new chief of police, a highly respected professional from outside the state, was appointed. Comprehensive training programs on de-escalation, implicit bias, and community policing became mandatory. An independent civilian review board was established, finally giving the community a genuine voice in police oversight. The local prosecutor's office also underwent a cleansing, with new leadership committed to impartial justice. Marcus Thorne observed these changes from a quiet distance. He attended some of the community meetings, not as a federal agent, but as a concerned resident. He saw the tentative hope in the eyes of his neighbors, the cautious optimism as the community began to heal and trust slowly returned. He didn't seek public accolades or personal acknowledgement. His satisfaction was profound, yet entirely internal. He had not sought personal vengeance against Price or Green. His objective had been systemic, to dismantle a corrupt structure that had preyed on the vulnerable and undermined the very principles of justice. One bright afternoon, several months later, Marcus was back in his backyard, finishing the very fence section that had sparked the entire chain of events. The wood was fresh, the nails secure, the repair complete. Mrs. Henderson, his once curious neighbor, approached his fence line. This time, her expression was open, a genuine smile on her face. "Mr. Thorne," she called out, her voice friendly. "It's looking wonderful. I just wanted to say, thank you. For everything." Marcus offered a small, polite smile. "Just doing my part, Mrs. Henderson." He knew she, and many others, understood the true scope of what he had done. He wasn't just fixing a fence, he had helped mend a broken community. As he hammered the final nail, the rhythmic sound was no longer punctuated by sirens or the tension of confrontation. It was simply the sound of honest work, of reconstruction. The sun, warm and benevolent, shone down on Echo Creek, a town that had been forced to confront its shadows, but now had the chance to step into a new, more just light. The silent, competent strategist had activated the mechanism of higher justice, and the catharsis, for him and for the community, was palpable and deeply earned.